Good evening, everyone. We're going to wait a few minutes to get started until everyone, all the participants can get signed up here. We have 10 attendees so far, so we're on the way to getting everybody on board. We'll probably give it some. All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the SMPTE-NY Section Meeting. Tonight's meeting is on the sustainability and economic viability of wireless TV delivery. And for those of you who are not members of SMPTE, I would encourage you to join. You can do this by going to the SMPTE website and looking for, I think there's a join button there. Just go and join up. There's lots of rewards for joining up, and particularly for the younger people in our audience who are not necessarily members now. It provides a great opportunity for networking and for education, not only through this type of meeting, but through other education opportunities within the SMPTE sphere. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors, who you're seeing a slide deck of them now, and they are numerous. Those are our commercial sponsors who donate to the SMPTE-NY section. Tonight's meeting is being moderated by Josh Gordon, who for the past 5 years has served as strategic marketing advisor for ATSC 3.0. And that goes back to when it wasn't a cool thing to do. His clients include Sinclair Broadcast, Digicap, and the Korean Radio Promotion Association. Josh is also the marketing chair for the New York SMPTE section. And without further delay, we'll turn it over to Josh, and hope you enjoy the presentation. Josh?
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Ed. We have a compelling and yet largely untold media sustainability story to tell. I like to keep up on television technology, especially those involving next-gen TV, also known as ATSC 3.0, but I had not heard about its unique sustainability attributes, even though I'd worked in that field section for 5 years. But after NAB 2023, that all changed. I was watching one of Mark Shubin's unique and always insightful NAB review presentations when I saw this slide. Mark had visited the ATSC booth and commented that despite the fact that there were many exhibits in the booth, as illustrated on the left side of the screen, none actually commented on what Mark thought was the most important characteristic of ATSC 3.0, which is in his title, the most sustainable television media form. So that kind of started me on a path that led to this panel being created, and the presentation you're going to see tonight put together. So, but it seems like just after NAB, there was a flurry of activity in this area. Just a few weeks ago at the ATSC 3 conference held in Washington, DC, ATSC for the first time announced that there would be a sustainability working group. You can see Robin Heron on the left side, together with two other folks who are starting working groups for ATSC. But that was the first time the ATSC organization had ever put its oar in the water in the sustainability piece. Also, just last week, our Barbara Lang, who is on our panel tonight, helped organize a fantastic 2-day Media Tech Sustainability Summit. And later in this presentation, you'll see ways to gain access to the on-demand content, 2 entire days just dedicated to media sustainability. I don't think that has ever been done before. So that being said, let's talk about the panel that we're in for tonight. These are your panelists, and I'm delighted that we've got a couple of SMPTE regulars on the panel. Barbara Lang, we're excited to have her on this panel. She used to be SMPTE's executive director, and but she left SMPTE to follow her passion, and she's now a sustainability expert and helped organize that 2-day event. So she will lead off the talk, and she's going to help position media sustainability into the bigger picture of sustainability in general. So we're going to start off with Barbara setting the table for the big picture of sustainability and how media fits into it. Then we're going to move to Mark Schubin. And Mark was the guy who got me kind of interested in this whole area. And when I called him up and asked him what why he was saying what he said in his presentation, he said, well, in Europe, there's all kinds of research being done on it. And of course, I don't believe there's any research having been done in the United States. So Mark will give us a summary of some of the seminal studies that have been done, and we'll speculate on how this applies to the US market. Then Cedric Lejeune is, thank you, Cedric, for shifting your time clock around. Cedric is joining us from France, and he runs a sustainability practice as part of Fast and Young, a media consultant. And what his job is to go into companies and help them find out where their sustainable strengths and weaknesses are, how they can improve their sustainability, and walk out with a plan that a company can follow. And he's recently done some work with one of France's largest terrestrial broadcasters, and he'll have some stories to share about that, how this actually works in the field day to day when you roll up your sleeves. Finally, Alan Stein, I wanted to have him on the panel because he has a way of explaining the benefits of ATSC3 in a way that it works with other medium. It's not a competition between ATSC3 and 5G and streaming. It's in the future, if we're going to really make this stuff work with the just the way trends are going, these platforms are going to have to work together. And Alan has a unique perspective on that. So that's our speakers, and that's the basic outline. Let me mention that this event is being recorded, so it will be possible to access the full recording of this to share with others, and we'll be posting it online and things like that. And whoops. Anyway.
Josh, if I could just add one point of order for those who have
Sure.
questions during the course of the presentations, please use the Q&A panel within Zoom to pose your questions, and I will be queuing them up for Josh's attention at the end when we'll be going through those questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Jeff Cohen, who's going to be helping us with the Q&A section. So the way the Q&A section will work is there'll be 3 sections of today's presentation. The first, we're going to go through our speakers, and each has a short presentation describing what I just described that they're going to talk about. Then we're going to have questions just for them that we are going to ask them. Jeff and I will coordinate those. And then the final half hour of tonight will be your questions. So my advice is ask questions and ask questions often. Use the Q&A button at the bottom center of your screen. And basically you text us a question and we'll see that your questions get answered. So we've got a lot of exciting new stuff to talk about. And at this point, I'd like to start it off with Barbara Lang, who will get us started on this journey. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Barbara, if you could share your screens and get us started.
Great. Well, thank you, Josh. And I'm just so delighted to be here. I love SMPTE and love my time at SMPTE. And so it's always nice to come back and see familiar faces and talk about a new topic that is very important to me. So thank you for this opportunity. As Josh said, I'm here to give you a little bit of a kind of high level overview of what sustainability means. So let's get into it. Let me just get back into there. There we are. So when we talk about sustainability, I think it's important to understand that it is the intersection of social, economic, and environmental concerns. Oftentimes, sustainability gets equated with just environmental issues, and it is predominantly that. But you can't solve those environmental issues without understanding the impact on the society and also economics. And if you look at the UN's SDGs, the Sustainability Development Goals, they incorporate all aspects of these components. And so it's important that we understand that today we're going to be focusing mostly on the environmental concerns. Perhaps this is a slide that you've seen before, but this is the global temperature change over the last 150 years or so, and you can see the dramatic shift in the temperature. And this is the issue that we're dealing with, that we're trying to address. And the world came together in 2015 to sign the Paris Agreement, which you may be hearing about in the mainstream media. And what that really means is limiting our global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius to compared to pre-industrial levels. What does that mean in practice? It means that if we are going to be able to mitigate these impacts of climate change, we need to achieve net zero by 2050, or roughly 45% reduction of our emissions by 2030. So it's a big lift, but based on the work that I've been doing in the last 18 months or so, I do think that the technology is there, the capabilities are there. It's more of a getting the whole world to look at this in the right way, from politics to business needs and all those other pieces. So how do you measure carbon emissions? Well, there is a framework called the Greenhouse Gas Protocols, which have established 3 scopes of emissions that each organization needs to measure. And this is how you can determine if you truly are net zero or not. So just briefly, scope 1 is the carbon emissions that are related to running your business. So that would include if you're a manufacturer, if you have data centers, if you have transportation and things like that. Relatively easy to measure because you control all that. Those are direct emissions. Scope 2 then is looking at your energy consumption and where your energy is coming from. Is it renewable, fossil fuels? What's the mixture? Also more or less easy to measure because, again, you have utility bills and you have ways to gain that information. Scope 3 then is the indirect emissions from the value chain. So your suppliers as well as your customers, and understanding the true emission costs of the products, the raw materials that you use, as well as how your customers are using that. Scope 3 can be up to 90% of the total carbon emissions calculation. So it's extremely challenging and is where most of the industries are struggling because it's not so easy to identify. If we look at the areas where the greatest contributors to carbon emissions, it really comes from the transportation electricity industry. So this move to decarbonize, it's really to move transportation to an electricity, e-vehicles and things like that, not just cars, but ships and airplanes and any kind of moving vehicle, and then decarbonizing the electricity grid so that it is renewables, nuclear, and other forms of energy away from fossil fuels. Once we address those two, then you can see that we have other areas that we can address as well. If you look at where our industry falls, it doesn't even show up on the grid, so to speak, but I would say that it's as close to the ICT sector, internet, computing, and telco sector. You can see that in comparison to things like cement manufacturing, it's quite small, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing some work to address the issue. And so to get to net zero, it's quite an easy calculation, although it's not easy to accomplish. You want to reduce your carbon emissions as much as you can, up to 90% or so, and the last 10% you can deal with through perhaps some carbon offsets. Once you do that, you can achieve a net zero calculation. You've seen this in products that you buy as a consumer. What you need to understand is what exactly organizations mean by net zero. There is a bit of greenwashing going on in the industry. And so it's imperative that consumers are aware and educated on what organizations are stating. So what does that mean in the media and entertainment sector? Speaking of those statements, here are just a few of the many organizations who've made statements that they are going to be net zero by certain dates. BBC, for example, by 2030, Disney the same. These are varying degrees of description. And also, if you really are net zero, you need to be doing scope 1, 2, and 3. So for an organization like the BBC, just as an example, to say that they're net zero, plan to be net zero by 2030, that means that they have tackled all of their carbon emissions calculations for all 3 scopes. So the industry is moving, these organizations are doing this. So what does that mean for media tech companies that are supplying those big media companies? Here's some examples of a few tests that have been run over the last several years about the true carbon emission for a television show or a film. In general, the larger the production, the more energy it's going to consume. And so the smaller the production, obviously, the better it can do it in today's traditional environment. Of course, over time, we're going to get better at technology and also the tool sets that we use. But this just gives you a gauge of what a typical film, large budget film might produce in terms of carbon emissions. The truth of the matter is, though, we are lacking data. So if I look at the workflow of the media and entertainment industry, I look at 3 buckets. It's not perfect, but for this exercise, I hope you will follow my logic. So content creation, of course, is where content is created. It's on the set. It's, there are ways to address how you can make a green production, and there are organizations that will help you do that. Probably the most famous is Albert from the UK, and they have certification processes that allow a production to be green using things like transitioning to e-vehicles, no single-use plastics, vegan catering, reducing waste and water, things of that sort. I would say that content creation is well covered off in terms of its ability to do green production. When we look at manipulation, that's the phase where I would say after production is complete, it goes into a manipulation phase, post-production, visual effects, color, all the things that happen to get the product ready for distribution. And this is mostly in the cloud, it's mostly digital, it is mostly taught touched by a number of different organizations who participate in that process. And there are no agreements and standards, best practices on how to measure, what to certify. It's a bit of a wild west. So this is a space where a lot more work needs to happen in terms of education and consensus building. Finally, you look at distribution space. Of course, that's where you get the product out mostly to the internet, but broadcast and other mechanisms. And here there are a number of different groups doing some interesting work. Greening of Streaming is one, Carbon Trust. There's another group called iMasons who have a climate accord, and iMasons is a nonprofit that deals with data centers and CDNs and greening of that. Not that this is a perfect place, but there's a lot of good work happening there. So I would give that a yellow. At the end of the day, and I think after you hear the rest of the presentations, you'll see that there is a lot of good work going on in moving media and entertainment to a more sustainable fashion, but we're still very much in early days, requiring a lot of education, knowledge sharing, and things of that sort, to get to the point of developing standards and best practices so that we can operate in a sustainable way and support those statements that the media companies have made. So I think with that, that is my portion of today's show, and I look forward to the rest of the presentations and answering any questions.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Barbara. What a great way to get started. Okay, I feel like we know where we're going. Now we're going to get a little more specific. Mark Shubin, you got me started on this path. Could you share some of the information that you have gone through and can share?
Sure. Okay. I'm here to tell you two things. One, that television broadcasting is not dead. And two, that it's the most sustainable delivery mechanism. And these slides are already posted online. If you want to get them, it's bit.ly/SNY as in SMPTE New York -SUST as in sustainable, or you can just take a picture of the QR code. And I'll have that at the end also. People talk about comparing apples and oranges all the time, but apples and oranges are actually quite comparable. They're both fruit, round, they're juice, they're healthy, they're sustainable, comparable in size and weight, but lots of other things are not so comparable. So this is the latest version of Nielsen's The Gauge about total TV viewing. And there's no real news here. Streaming has increased, broadcast and cable have decreased, but even with the decreases, broadcast is pretty close to a quarter of the video that people are watching today. And that's just for general programming. If we get to things like news, then here's a story that local news has a 10 times larger audience than subscription video on demand. Now, let me go back for just a moment to the other slide. Notice that the top streaming company is YouTube, and notice in this that YouTube was not measured in this particular survey. So again, take everything with a grain of salt. When we talk about the Super Bowl, it is the #1 show every year, and it is a broadcast show. And here they're saying that the audience was 113 million viewers. And then if you look down at the lower part, it says that streaming averaged 7 million viewers. So a tiny portion of what broadcast was getting is what streaming was getting. And even in streaming, it's hard to compare things. This is something shown from SimWave, where they're measuring 2 streams that are both carrying the Super Bowl live. And this is a quality scale, and you see quite different results from the 2 streams, even though there's different vertical scales. One is moving around quite a bit. The other one is generally very high quality, but has a few dips to much lower quality than the other one has.
Mark, which of those, could you tell us what those 2 represent?
I probably could, but I should not.
Oh, okay.
because it would be pointing out things that aren't to be pointed out. I did
Okay.
see from something available on the net which one the top one is. I actually don't know which one the bottom is.
Okay.
I will not say it.
Okay.
Meanwhile, antenna adoption is growing. And so while people are cutting the cord, they are not cutting the cord to their antennas. So there is broadcast, it is substantial, and it may even be increasing. Now, this slide is just to show you instructionally the difference between what people refer to as IPTV, which is a push basis. These are the channels that you get from your cable system or your satellite provider, something like that. And then OTT, or over the top, which is a pull basis. You request a particular program and then it comes to you. But this is a project that was studying low carbon television. And here are their results. And let's look at the bottom first. And if you look at Sweden down at the bottom right, then the worst case for Sweden is more than 4 times better than the best case in the UK. And that's simply because of the way that Sweden gets its power. It's mostly from sustainable sources. The second column is for Europe in general, 28 countries. But if we look up at the top, you see that things are much more comparable across the countries. This is how much electricity is being used. And this is excluding the TV set, but you can see that digital terrestrial television, of which ATSC 3.0 is an example, is dramatically more sustainable than, or uses dramatically less electricity than either OTT streaming or IPTV. Now, this is from a portion of one page out of 102 from one resource that's available on Barbara's site. And just notice the 2 red circles that I put in here, or the red ovals. There's more than 100 to 1 difference in how much carbon they're talking about being used for an hour of television. So again, take this stuff with a grain of salt, and I recommend you read the whole report, which explains things better. You can click on this link if you download my slides, or you can simply enter it, and all you have to do is register. You don't have to pay anything, and you have access to the resources from Barbara's event. This is from another resource from Barbara's event. This is a BBC white paper, and you see that it follows basically the same thing that the LOCAT study was showing. BBC's iPlayer is streaming, and that's got the highest electricity use. Satellite is next highest, cable is next highest, and then terrestrial is so far down that it brings the average below any of the other 3 simply by being there. So digital terrestrial television is just remarkably sustainable. Well, what happens if we add the TV set in? So this is from the LOCAT report, and they're simply saying, okay, let's add a 56-watt television. Well, maybe that's what people are using in Europe. My TV is 96 watts, but even with the 96-watt TV, that would be dramatically the largest part of the electricity that's being used for digital terrestrial television. But streaming and IPTV, it's still going to have a significant difference, even over what the TV set is drawing. Also, nobody is sitting still. So ATEM is leading a consortium on making 5G more energy efficient. And here is something from Alluvio's website. They have a very different way of distributing. And if you look at the next to the last thing on the right, it says they are 50% more efficient at distributing than clouds and CDNs. So once again, a PDF of these slides is available at bit.ly/SNY-SUST, or take a picture of this QR code and you can get those slides immediately.
Great, thank you, Mark. Great assemblage of facts. I mean, I think you've summed up the case for the sustainability of terrestrial television quite well. Okay. Okay, so Barbara gave us the big picture. Mark gave us the some specifics. Cedric, maybe you can talk to us about how this actually can be actionalized, how this can actually be put into a program.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I'm going to talk about how to manage the project in your company. With Fast and Young, we focused on the engineering side of things. We specialize in the transformation of organization to be more sustainable. So the way we consider sustainability, it's much aligned with Barbara said before. It's about connecting quality, efficiency, energy, and carbon emissions, and using carbon calculation as a KPI. It's actually what we found out is that's actually a good way to understand if something is efficient or not. So it's actually a good way to measure your the performance of a company. What is a sustainability project in media? Well, actually, it can be very different from company to company. And you may think about, carbon assessment report. Even carbon assessment reports can be very different depending on what you want to achieve. And what you want to achieve is mostly dependent on who is asking for the project. It can be the finance for regulations. For example, in Europe, we have the CSRD that ask larger companies to declare their carbon emissions. You may have some shareholders because you're part of a group, and this group has a net zero strategy, and in that case you have to be fully compliant with all the protocol of the company and the group. It can be some people in the management. That can be a branding exercise because your brand is actually talking to a part of the population that is sensitive to the topic. It can be also something if you want to get more attractive to younger engineers and younger people that you want to hire. So in that case, you will have different approach to the way you drive your sustainability project. At some point, once you've defined that, it's also about finding who is willing to get involved, because the first and foremost thing in a sustainability project is that you will have to connect a lot of data. You will have to get in your company and get some information, and that will be a whole process. So because if we want to, again, because sustainability is about the business and information, we want to connect these things together, and we need that information to actually provide a good overview of how we can change things in the company. So we are engineers, and our approach is, and I'm so happy to be at SMPTE tonight. It's really trying to get as close as possible to the resource we use in production. You have, in general, the way carbon assessment reports are made is based on what is called the top-down approach, where you take, for example, the overall electricity bill, and then you split it between the different parts of the company. What we try to do is actually to understand what is the actual equipment that is used for each part of the process. We try also to understand and get information about the building. So we have heating information, cooling information, power consumption, and also something that is very important if you consider the scope 3, as mentioned earlier, is that you will have to also get information about the people who are involved in the process, because people are part of the production process and they have an impact. So that is also something that you need to collect. So the two keys for success for sustainability projects will be agility, because you have data that is easy to access, some that is not. You have it's a process that is quite new, and it will also show some of the potentially weaknesses of your information system and all that. So at some point you may, for example, what we try to do is if we don't have information that is precise enough, we will work with statistics and all that. So this is something we want to adapt. And for the information system, yes, it can be a bit of a frustrating process because you need a lot of data, for example, to calculate the carbon emissions. And that means having people on the phone and having meetings to make sure that you have all the information you need. So the way we start actually to get people involved in the process is with training. I'm a big supporter of training, and SMPTE has been great organization to provide training to the industry, and I think actually sustainability is a topic to develop in the future. It's very important to get people aware of the challenges, not only about the climate, because we talk quite a lot about the climate, but in sustainability, you also have a question about resource. Energy is a resource, but also the equipment. You have with what's happening in Taiwan, in Ukraine, and all that, those have an impact. For example, in Europe, the cost of energy and also because of speculation raised to crazy levels last year, and that had an impact of our operations. And I mean, for example, in Belgium, there were some bakeries that closed, but also some animation studios, just because the cost of electricity went too high, and their business was not running anymore. So it was a financial problem that was indirectly linked to a resource problem, and at the end of the day, it affected the sustainability of the company. So once we get in the training, what we want to achieve is actually to have a consensus of what is sustainability for a company, how it affects the business and the jobs, and nature, because I mean we are part of nature, and nature gives us all the resources that we need, so we have to take care. And then obviously come with solutions. We are engineers, we have solutions. That's what we're here for. So that's also another way of thinking about it. Just like, how can I bring those solutions, and how the solution at the end of the day can actually make good savings for the company, and actually help the business thrive. So that's also something that at some point, once we have the good incentives to start a project, then we can go for it. So collecting and processing the data, in fact, what we tend to do, especially now with the energy crisis in Europe, is working in parallel with energy and GHG emission. Why? Because, for example, replacing equipment sometimes help saving the energy, but you also have to consider the impact of the manufacturing of the equipment. So also you have to consider that you need more information than what we will have for a financial report. For finance, you will have, for example, to calculate the TCO, you will need the price of the equipment, its power consumption, its life expectancy. For carbon calculation, you also need to know where it's been manufactured, what kind of resource and materials were used. So that's what we call life cycle analysis. And then the source of electricity that is used during its life, and how the end of life is managed. So at Canon Plus, that's what we did. In fact, what we were asked to was to look at different kinds of productions, being internal productions or content that was acquired, and try to have a precise evaluation of scope 3 carbon emissions. So what we did is we took the power consumption for the studios, extract the information from the building. So obviously heating, cooling are a big part of that, but also everything that goes with the equipment, being the video equipment, the IP equipment. And then everything regarding the people working in the studio, how they come to this, how they come to the studio, and what they eat, because that's also part of the process. And for sports program, we also looked at the configuration with Obi vans and what kind of electricity was used. We learned quite a lot from this experience that actually we had to cross from different sources, and it was a tedious process of more than 12 months to get, it was a pretty large project, consolidate all the information to make it compatible. I mean, like Mark mentioned about apple and oranges, you want to have something where you can really compare things, and it's sometimes not easy. Actually, once you have that, you start to find solutions and build a plan where you actually plan for savings for the company, which is something very positive. And but you also have some stuff where you have a lot of carbon emissions, but you are very much constrained. For example, if you have a studio, the thermal insulation is not something that is easy to fix. And at the end of the day, you also have things where we can have great opportunities to reduce. For example, with remote production, we can reduce a lot the travel emissions. So conclusions, first thing is you cannot change something you cannot measure. So getting data, and getting data is hard. So once you have data, actually you can make decision actually, and you can track those decisions. Having a good information system in your company will help, and that is actually something why with my new company we focus on the information system. Potentially AI may be something interesting in the future to help understanding what are the issues and being more precise. And again, we are engineers, we have solutions. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Cedric. It's a great presentation. And I might add a very sustainable one too, with no graphics. So you probably traveled around with very low carbon footprint. Okay. Okay, next up we have Alan Stein, who's going to try to pull a few things together. He sits in a unique technological point where he sees a lot of different things coming together, and he has some news of some innovations that are going on, some different ways to look at things like HDR that will be more sustainable than some of the ones currently in use. And why don't you take it away, Alan?
Thanks. Can you hear me okay? Okay,
yep.
Great. So I'm going to drill down into a couple of particular sustainability research and development activities at my company, InterDigital. I will also later address some of the points Josh mentioned at the top about ATSC 3 in line with what Mark presented. The first topic I want to talk about is there a green HDR approach? There have been reports that going to Ultra HD and HDR actually lead televisions to consume more power than just HD, and that's a concern. And of course, we know that there wasn't a fast cutover into Ultra HD and HDR. Things are coexisting, and so there's a need for either converting between SDR and HD and HDR with UHD. And so what we're really trying to do is avoid simulcasting of HDR and SDR, which would be not very green. So particularly from the point of view of spectrum owners, terrestrial like ATSC 3 or cellular, using additional spectrum for both HDR and SDR would be economically unattractive and if not prohibitive. Certainly the ATSC 3 community wasn't given additional spectrum to roll out 3.0. So ideally, an operator might want to allow non-HDR devices, older TVs, phones, tablets, laptops, to render the same stream in SDR that it's delivering in HDR, and potentially for HDR displays to display as SDR as an eco mode option. And so the technology, advanced HDR by Technicolor, is technology that's included in ATSC 3.0, which basically takes HDR video and is able to encode it as a single stream of SDR plus metadata. And so what's the advantage here? There's an advantage for broadcast that's fairly obvious, which is you have a single stream, which for HDR TVs can be reconstructed as HDR, but for non-HDR devices, you still have an SDR rendition, which is quite accurate due to the dynamic nature of the advanced HDR by Technicolor capabilities. For streaming, this gets interesting in the sense of being able to encode less bit streams. When we think about fewer bit streams, when we think about encoding ladders in adaptive streaming, we're encoding 10 times. Sometimes we're encoding 14 times. I heard a talk recently where Mile High Video, someone was had a 8 HEVC plus 6 AVC ladder, and that wasn't HDR. That was only SDR. If he had to do HDR on top, he's either doing, let's say he's doing at least 22. He's doing 8 more HEVC encodes. So this technology allows for fewer encodes, and we know that, Barbara said, part of the concern in sustainability has to do with the network delivery, and part of that is the encoding. A lot of this encoding is happening in the cloud, and if you have to encode a piece of content 22 times, you're really, you are not doing things sustainably. So we think that advanced HDR by Technicolor HDR technology is fairly interesting. And again, one could imagine, as in Europe, as Mark talked about, in Europe, there's a more active regulatory environment. One could imagine sort of a forced eco mode where you say, somewhere down the pipe, you have signaling that says, reduce your power. And so part of reduce your power could be, don't show it in HDR. To switch gears a little bit, talk a little bit about sustainability and standards. Some of this has already been mentioned, but I think it's good to see more comprehensively. So many standards bodies and industry forum are now active in the sustainability space. So we heard about the ATSC planning team, where my colleague Bill Redmond is actually co-chair with Robin from ATEM. MPEG has a green MPEG initiative, which is developing some interesting solutions. The ITUR was mentioned earlier. SMPTE itself has a study group for energy efficiency. DVB has a study mission, and the Ultra HD Forum is interesting end-to-end organization looking at sustainability. I'm glad to say that some of my colleagues are holding leadership roles in these various standards organizations, and I think the key is for the standards organizations to coordinate. I think there is a potential for these groups to not operate harmoniously, and I think if we can coalesce the activity of multiple standards organizations, we can actually do significant things. I want to talk a little bit about another innovation out of InterDigital's labs, one that we call pixel value reduction. If you remember the slide that showed the ICT sector, there were sort of 3 components, with CE devices being the largest contributor to energy use, and TVs are a culprit, and so we have to address TV energy use. Now, there's a natural conflict between trying to get the best picture possible versus reducing, let's say, naively reducing brightness, which can reduce energy. So the innovation that is being researched and developed has taken the idea of reusing video quality metrics in order to understand where there are opportunities for reducing on a pixel by pixel basis. And if you understand OLED TVs, you understand that you can do things like that with OLED TVs. You don't have to dim a whole zone. You can actually have per pixel manipulation. And so the idea is input video would be analyzed using energy aware algorithms, which are similar to the type of algorithms that are used in video compression, that are used in video quality analysis. And this would be captured as metadata And after delivery, you could actually at the television have a pixel-wise content adaptation. Now, there are two ways to use that. One is to sort of cut the energy in half and just make the best picture possible with a target energy reduction. The other way is to say, well, try to keep the picture as high quality as possible and save what you can. And so, so we think those two use cases are pretty interesting. So my colleagues have done a study of this technique, and to just cut to the conclusion, they came to the conclusion that a 10% reduction in energy use could be realized with an almost imperceptible impact on video quality. And wrote a paper about it, won the Best Paper Award at the Mile High Video Conference. And so we think that this has a great potential for helping to green the future. So thanks. I hope I left time for questions.
Yeah. Okay, Alan. Great. Thank you. Okay, so let's get started. Could we have our panelists bring up your pictures, and we have a few questions to get started here. Out of the gates, I've got the same question for Cedric and Barbara. Now, you operate in different parts of the world. Barbara, you're here in good old USA. Cedric, you're in Europe. There's an old saying in politics, never let a good crisis go to waste. I guess the question is, what are the drivers that push media tech companies to save energy? And I was wondering, Cedric, if you had a different take on that than Barbara has, given the different locations you're in.
Well, I would say that maturity in Europe is better in the sense that the initiatives around sustainability and regulations started pretty much 5 to 10 years ago in our sector. The UK, the Nordic countries, Germany, in France, it's accelerating right now, but there's been some initiatives for the last 4 or 5 years, and suddenly regulations for larger groups and net zero initiatives are becoming something that stress out the you have to provide extra financial reports for shareholders and all that. So suddenly that is pushing a lot the industry, probably even more than industry regulations. Obviously, especially for the last 2-3 years, we've had the institutions to accelerate on the topic. But I would say if you have a large group, like for example, Canon Plus is part of Vivendi, or TF1 is part of Bouygues Group, it's those groups, they have at the group level a carbon reduction strategy. So they're actually pushing not only their own company for their own productions, but also for the content they acquire. So all the vendors have to get into the process.
How has the oh, go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, sorry. I think so as Cedric says, Europe is probably about 5 years ahead of what's happening in the US, and the drivers are slightly different. US is a more regulatorily driven society, whereas in the US it's not. And so they've been able to make a lot more progress on sustainability because it's been mandated. But that's coming here in the US too. So don't despair. It's going to come here in the US in the form of public-facing companies. The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, is in the process of updating its reporting requirements that will require public companies to have a sustainability statement of some form. It's still being debated what exactly that is, probably at least scope 1 and 2, possibly also scope 3. And what that means for small media tech companies, you know, you probably think, oh, I'm a private company, I it doesn't affect me. Well, if you want to work for a public company, you're going to be asked to supply these informations. And I noticed there's a question in the queue already about a company asking for sustainability data from its vendors. So that's going to happen. And today, in fact, if you want to do business in the UK, for example, with the UK production, you are required to abide by the UK sustainability requirements. So it's a matter of time that we all have to deal with this. And so we just need to all sort of get our ducks in a row. And I think overall, we are in a period of education and knowledge sharing right now, because much of the industry, much of the world still is unfamiliar with how to proceed. And so don't despair if you haven't started on a sustainability journey, but you ought to start thinking about it and getting yourself organized in a way that you can begin to report on it.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Mark Shubin, if ATSC 3.0 is the most sustainable television delivery system, can it start to cut into or replace streaming?
Well, the simple answer is no. Because if I want to watch some obscure program that was around 20 years ago, if there are 10 of us doing the same thing, then we've used up a transmitter pretty much. So that's not going to happen. But there's a longer answer, and it involves the standards that Barbara was talking about and the powers of ATSC 3.0 that Alan was alluding to. And that is, if streaming has some very hot show, Game of Thrones, Ted Lasso, whatever it happens to be, and that is transmitted to a cache in the TV set, and this is where Barbara's standards come in, say in the overnight hours when it doesn't really bother anyone, then that one bit of streaming, which is taking up an awful lot of the energy because it's what everyone is watching, can be delivered by ATSC 3.0 and in a much more sustainable way.
If I could just add, I did a little back of the envelope calculation for that scenario, just taking sort of a canonical 25 megabit per second between 3 and 5 in the morning, a single channel. And you turn out that you can deliver over 22 gigabytes to an entire city with the 3 to 5 a.m. scenario on a single stick, while still fulfilling your FCC requirement to broadcast. So there is a dramatic one-hop CDN story with ATSC 3 that I think needs further exploration. Thanks.
Alan, while we're talking to you, could you describe some of the activity going on in India, where they're putting ATSC as a slice into their 5G system?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have any slides on that, but yeah, absolutely. So ATSC has had a working agreement with TSDSI, which is India's telco standards organization and a 3GPP partner. And the idea of the cooperative effort has to do with what they're calling broadcast offload. India has sort of overly burdened cellular networks, and people watch video on their phones. The costs are low, the subscription costs are low, and particularly for live sports events and the like, it is an extremely popular way, and it's really taxing the cellular infrastructure. So what ATSC is trying to do with companies like Sankhya Labs and others is to be able to, for the first time, really deliver broadcast video to cell phones. And again, one large tower for an entire city is far more economically viable than a large cellular network, a dense cellular network, and upgrading the cellular network. So these things won't compete. This is actually a complementary technology, and the business arrangements and who pays what company is still to be worked out. But the idea of using broadcasting in order to have an adjunct way to deliver live and popular content in India is moving quickly, and they are very committed to this. They've taken some of their T2 off the air and are using the spectrum for trials and that sort of thing. So it's fairly exciting.
Okay, good stuff. Huh. Barbara, you mentioned that regulation in the US is not a popular approach to change, but you also mentioned that you think it's coming. Could you give us your best ideas to when it will come and how soon?
It's the government, so who knows? Well, this SEC thing that I mentioned earlier was put in the public domain for comment in April 2022 with the goal to deliver regulation by November 22. Here we are, end of June 23, and it's still not out yet. So, and the reason is because there's a big debate about scope 3 is very hard. As Cedric pointed out, it's very difficult. And so there's been some pushback about how far to go. I think it's a matter of time. Scope 3 will be part of this at some point, but at the moment, that's where the debate is. So it's anyone's guess, I guess. I would hope that it happens this year. And obviously there's a lot of interest. Part of the issue with the investor community is that ESG, and maybe you've follow this a little bit, is very unregulated in how it's measured. It's self-reporting, really. There are various indices out there in the investor community that will rate companies based on their ESG performance, but there is no standard. So one company could have a very good rating in one index and a very poor rating in another index. And so part of this SEC change is to bring some order to that, some form of standards. But the U.S. is very much, looking at what is happening in Europe and California, for example. My understanding is that California is planning to adopt the EU regulations, very similar to how they handled GDPR a few years back. So, we may not like what's happening in Europe, but California seems to like it and will very much looks to adopt those regulations. So when is it coming? I would get ready now. I would start now. That's what I would do.
Yeah,
Okay.
Just another point about the US. I'm not local anymore, but there is the Green Deal with actually a lot of subsidies and programs to finance green initiatives in the US. And as Barbara pointed out, since there is no standards, it's very difficult for companies to compare and to actually pick the right projects and all that. So that's also the reason why the regulations will arrive, just to make sure that the Green Deal money gets to the right place. So a lot of people will get a strong incentive just to get that money in their pockets.
And just to clarify, it's the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes, because the Green Deal here in the US was a different piece of legislation, but Cedric's absolutely right. The IRA, which was passed in August 2022, included a great deal of investment, and media companies should take advantage of that as well, by the way. So that's part of moving us in the US at least further down this path.
Okay. Well, all this is going on the consumer electronics side. There's kind of an arms race going on where, a lot of set manufacturers are pushing the 8K sets, which obviously are going to consume a lot more energy. I hear that there was some TV set power limits that were supposed to put a damper on that in Europe, but that seems not to have happened. Is that true? What's going on with 8K TV sets?
Well, the EU power limit was supposed to prevent 8K TV sets from coming out, but you have to be very careful how you write your regulations. And the way that the EU wrote the regulation was what counts is how the TV set comes out of the box. So you buy a TV set And if its power consumption limit when it comes out of the box is below the EU amount, then that's fine. That TV is totally compliant. So Samsung came up with something they called Eco Mode, and it dimmed the screen, and it comes out of the box that way, and therefore it's compliant. But of course, the customer doesn't like the dim screen, and so goes to the menu and removes the Eco Mode and gets a nice bright screen that's using up lots of electricity, but that's okay because it came out of the box in Eco Mode.
Oh boy. Okay. Wow. That's quite a system. Okay.
Josh, if I may too, I mean, these are, am I allowed to say it? These are kind of workarounds to you know, to try to comply. And the other piece of the EU legislation is penalizing organizations for greenwashing. So that's happening today. Companies are being penalized for making statements that are not verified as true. And so, yeah, I guess you can get around these sorts of things now, but I think over time that's also going to have to change, because it's going to become obvious, and the regulators will chase after that, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a bit like you know, the Volkswagen scandal with the Dieselgate. We could call the Samsung thing the Pixel Gate with the dim mode. I think it's not very honorable for us engineers to come out with workarounds, as Barbara said. We need to find proper solutions, and there are proper solutions. So we should just work the right way on the right problems.
Anyone else have a comment on that? Okay. All right, I have one last question that I'd like you all to weigh in on, and then Jeff Cohen is going to read off some questions from some of the participants who have put in some questions in the Q&A box. So the question I'd like to ask is about data. Basically, the first step of this whole process is measuring it. Cedric tells us that if you don't measure it, it doesn't improve. Barbara says sometimes the organizations that we're involved with, there's no commonality between their standards, so it's hard to get a handle on what is measured and how much. Your best ideas on how this happens moving forward? What do we do to get the right data to make the changes that have to happen?
Well, what is very difficult from our experience, especially in production, it's probably the same when you're in distribution, but I guess the process is more streamlined, is in production, you have different information systems running in parallel. You have the finance stuff, the production stuff, and it's not interconnected. And what was very interesting, for example, working for Canon Plus, is we were working with actually the finance people, and they were very much interested in our work, just because connecting the dots give us a very good overview of how the company works. And actually everyone learned quite a lot in the process, and learned that by having a better interconnection between the different systems, we could save money, actually. We could have something where we better understand and can react faster to problems and all that, because you have things that, oh wow, we have, you know, that bill multiplied by 3, and we didn't quite realize, you know, all those things. I think can be made much more efficient if you have the opportunity, which may be difficult, because especially in the broadcast company, you may have a lot of different production companies working in parallel, so it may be a challenge to connect them together. But everyone gets, I mean, there's a strong incentive to get information, to better understand the way your business works.
I could chime in a little bit. I think you know, standards have a role to play here, and figuring out what needs to be measured and reported at each step of the chain is actually a non-trivial exercise, which will require multiple standards to coordinate. There's another challenge, which is some of this is happening in the cloud. And so, if you have a box, you can measure the energy consumption of a box, and you can measure the energy consumption of a box when it is quiet and not doing things, and when it is loaded, and you can get interesting data. But when you move to the cloud, it's not quite the same story. So I think there are multiple challenges, and I think the standards communities, plural, are wrestling with this, and I think there could be a solution if the standards communities can work together to do end-to-end measurement, but it's going to take time.
Sounds
I can add my 2 cents. I support everything that Cedric and Alan said. I think the industry, look, we're in an early stage of this transition, and we've had the good fortune, most of us, to live and work in a world where energy wasn't an issue. But now we have to change that. We have to change the mindset. It's a lot of this is, the tech and the data and gathering all that is on some level, it's challenging, but it's doable. The mindset change is perhaps even more difficult. You really have to embed this philosophy of sustainability from the beginning of your strategy discussions. And as you build out products and you care about the financial measures of success, you also need to include at the very same time, well, what impact does this new product or service have from a sustainability point of view? And once you start thinking that way, where sustainability is right there and in your face every day, I think over time it becomes more natural and it's not extra anymore. But we're now in a phase where we have to, it is extra. It's one more thing we have to do, but sadly, it's a very important thing that we have to do. And I think it's just, it's going to take some time to get everybody sort of in the same wavelength. And I think what you'll find is those who are successful will succeed, and those who ignore this will not.
That's probably true. Mark, any thoughts about data, or is it?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that what seems obvious is not necessarily so. And I'll give you an example from Cedric. It was at an HPA tech retreat, was it 2019 or 2020? He was analyzing which was more sustainable in LA, doing editing at home, and accessing the necessary stuff through the cloud, or getting in a car and getting stuck on the freeway and going to the place and doing it. And his conclusion was, yes, the working at home was better, but just barely. And he said in a different city and under different circumstances, going into the office might have been the more sustainable move.
Huh. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's actually something that you have the strategy you deploy may be very different from depending on the energy source. For example, in France or Sweden, we have a very low carbon electricity. So working on your infrastructure is probably not the most important thing you have to do, whether if you go in countries like Poland or Slovakia, you have much more carbon intensity for the electricity, and then actually finding ways to reduce your electricity consumption is a key to reduce your emissions. So it's and actually even for an international group that has facilities across different countries, it may be an opportunity to shuffle stuff from one country to equipment from one country to another. So it's a case-by-case approach. Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, I think at this point we're going to change gears. Jeff, could you pull up your screen? And Jeff has been monitoring the questions as they've come in while we've been busy with other things. And Jeff, why don't you read
Yeah,
off
I'm
the
just
best
going
questions?
to sort of give you an overview of the questions that have come in. I would say
Okay.
they all fall into the category of what hidden contributors to the cost of operations are there. So for instance, what transmission technologies, high power transmitters, microwave relays, STLs, translators, how do those items contribute to the overall energy budget of media? And then there were, of course, a few questions that you guys addressed already on the subject matter of, what in consumer displays and consumer devices at the display side of the industry contributes to energy consumption. So I think some of those you did address, but for instance, William Laziza from CUNY asked a question about AKTVs, used in a dark room, would they still be dim in the dim mode? He asked, comparing them to a 100 nit monitor, but I think he probably meant a 1000 nit monitor. So maybe you guys would address those transmission and display questions for the audience. Thank you.
I would just say nobody watches television in a color grading environment. People grade television in a color grading environment, but they don't watch television there. And that's caused some HDR problems that have nothing to do with sustainability. There have been huge complaints about things like Game of Thrones, where people say they can't see anything. And then HBO's response was, well, it was a creative decision. Yeah, it was a creative decision in a color grading suite, but that's not how people watch television. So we need to design and account for sustainability in the sort of environment in which people actually watch television.
And I,
Go,
sorry.
no, go ahead.
I would also say that someone mentioned it on this today about, I think it was Alan in India, right? They're watching on their mobile devices. And I think we need to get smarter about streaming the right content to the device so that you're not sending big fat files to smartphones, right? And I think those are challenges that the engineering community can really get behind, and the more we do that, and also thinking about things like mastering, versions. Like, why do we need a million different versions of a particular piece of content? The encoding example. I mean, these are just efficiencies, really revisiting perhaps the workflow and saying, do we really need to do that extra encode? Do we really need to master yet another version? Those things will all contribute to reducing waste, I guess is the best way to put that.
I agree with Barbara, but I want to jump back to the ambient light sensor and the 8K TV in the dark room. I think ambient light sensors actually are, and keeping TVs in a mode where they can intelligently choose their peak output is actually a really good and simple step towards reducing consumption of television. So I would encourage that. I don't think, as Mark said, I don't think an 8K display in a dark room looks like Ikigami integrating suite. And I think he did mean 100, but yeah. Thanks.
Any other questions, Jeff?
That's about all we've got, unless anyone wants to type any in right now.
Okay.
Let me just mention that I put the link to register for Barbara's conference. The conference is over, but if you register and it's free, you do get to access all of the resources. And there was some mention of going to mobile devices. That's all covered in that Carbon Trust paper, that 102-page thing that I showed a small portion of one of the pages of.
Okay. Go ahead.
If I thank you for the plugs, all very much appreciated. We are all of the sessions were recorded, and those will be posted also to that website as well, hopefully by Monday. So it's all free. There's a resource center with, I don't know, about 50 different documents, white papers, studies, and things like that. And then all the recordings are also at your disposal. So please feel free. We just ask that you register so we can keep you informed on future events.
And there were some great speakers from pretty high profile organizations in there. It's gonna be
Including
good.
Cedric.
Including Cedric, that's right. Okay, I think if we could just go around the horn and closing comments from our speakers. Just we shared a lot of information, a lot of really great ideas. If you've got any parting comments. Unless we've said it all.
Well,
Alan?
let me thank you, Josh, and thank Mark, Barbara, and Cedric. I learned a lot from you guys, and thank you for including me.
Oh, well,
Ditto. I appreciate it too.
Yes,
no, I
thanks,
think
Will.
that's good. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Well, on behalf of SMPTE New York, I'd like to thank you all for coming. It was really great to see Barbara Lang on a SMPTE webinar once again. And always great when Mark shows up for one. And Alan, we learned a lot from you too. You got a lot of unique insight. And Cedric, it was nice to have the European perspective, because like Barbara said, you're about 5 years ahead of us. So, you know, what you're doing now is probably what we're going to be doing 5 years from now. So all of that is very good stuff. Okay.
Someone asked for my slide link, so I'm just gonna stick that up.
Want to pop that up again?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
There we go.
Excellent. Okay. Ed, do you
Okay,
have any
please.
closing comments?
Yeah, I placed in the chat a link to the SMPTE website to join as a SMPTE member. I would encourage you to do that. And if you capture that link, it's right there in the chat for you. And thank you all for your insightful remarks tonight. And thank you, Josh, for pulling this all together.
Okay. Thank you all. And we're
thank
we're
you.
out. Okay.
Have a
Thank you.
wonderful 4th of
Bye.
July.
Yeah. Happy
Yeah.
4th. Okay.
So
Bye-bye.
long.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Bye.
That's right.